Welcome to True You Ministries with pastoral counselor Stacy Echeverria. Stacy is a licensed pastoral counselor whose own journey has taught her the importance of having a safe place to discuss the harder issues of life. We're grateful that you've joined us for this week's broadcast. You can learn more about Stacy and her heartfelt desire to help people much like yourself who may be at a place of pain and confusion by calling her at 626-461-3344. That's 626-461-3344. Or feel free to email her at info@trueyouministries.com. And welcome to another edition of True You Ministries with your pastoral counselor, Stacy Echeverria. Stacy, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing really well today. How about you, Todd?
I'm always good, and I'm always blessed when I get to do a show with you because I always learn so much. And especially when we've got your special guest today, Phil Cox, and this is a part 2. How are you doing today, Phil?
I'm doing well. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us. You know, this is such a important topic that we're dealing with. It's part 2 of helping children with loss. And if you missed any part of, if you missed part 1, you can go to trueyouministries.com and watch the video on there to get caught up. And what we were talking about in the first episode, or part 1 of this, we touched on how adults can help children with loss. And can you just give us a little recap of a few things that we talked on there, either Stacy or Phil? Who wants to take it? Who wants to give us the recap?
I'll turn it over to you, Phil. Go ahead.
Well, we talked a little bit about how adults can help children with loss. And that is, first, adults need to go first because obviously we are the ones they look up to. And we need to recognize our own ways of dealing with loss. And it's usually when we were children, we learned it from our parents or grandparents or whatever adults we looked up to. And we need to first recognize that the ways that we dealt with loss haven't helped us, haven't been productive, and haven't helped us. And I learned it as a chaplain in attempting to help someone with loss and saying things. And sometimes the looks I would get, even quoting scripture, and recognize what I just said was accurate and true, but in this moment didn't help. And so adults need to first go first. And then we also learned how sometimes the accumulation of those things, some of the myths, grieve alone, and some of the others that we'll probably get to, cause the children to use other methods to help them with the pain. When they're not able to give voice to or express those emotions, and how those ways can develop into more serious ways. Some are harmless. For example, eating, let's have a treat, a cookie, ice cream, and that'll help you to forget and distract them. And other ways, as they get older, they may get into more harmful things. And how, as one CDC and Kaiser Permanente study called the ACE study, recognized that as children, adolescents, teenagers get to be adults, they get into more harmful long-term things such as addictions that can affect them for a lifetime. And need to help the children early on to be able to express, give voice to, and deal with those losses. And so that kind of catches us up, I think. And obviously the need for incorporating scripture and God into all of this. And probably Stacy will bring up, as we usually do, I think.
Yeah. I think too, with regard to the grief and the loss, especially within our culture here in the United States, there are other cultures where it's so much a part of, life, right? That we need to make it we're not necessarily saying we're not, for lack of a better word, we're normalizing it, but to understand that we will experience loss in life. And so how can we, in a healthy way, navigate through it? Because when you have a parent that isolates and goes away, the messaging there for me was there's something really wrong about grieving. That it's not okay, that it isn't okay to grieve, when it really is a natural expression of loss.
Yes. You can't you can't turn off your emotions. I
Right.
mean, you can suppress the expression of it, but you can't turn them off. They're there. They're
Correct.
God given,
Yeah. Right.
and you can't turn them off. And especially in our culture, you're in a quiet funeral home during a funeral, and someone sobs out loud. Look around at how
Yes.
uncomfortable people are with that. Someone quickly hands them a
Mhm.
tissue. They you touch them. You try your
Mhm.
best suppress
Mhm.
that. Not
Mhm.
every culture is that way, but people just can't
Right.
wait for them to calm down.
Yeah.
So, you just don't want that. People are very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
In fact, it's a taboo subject. And we will use just about every other term we can think of other than grief. We use stress, we use pressure, we use even PTSD, which is a whole
Mhm.
different subject. We use depression, we use all kinds of stuff. And some of it, a lot of it, I think, is normal grief. And then we tend to
Mhm.
diagnose and medicate and all kinds of
Yeah.
things that,
Yeah.
again, lead to long-term things that are not healthy, whether
Yeah.
it's
Right.
physically, emotionally, or even spiritually.
Right. Right. Yeah.
For those just tuning in, this is True You Ministries with Stacy Echeverria. She's a pastoral counselor. If you have any questions or you want to reach out to Stacy, please give her a call at 626
I lost
461 3344. Can you still hear us, Phil? Still there? Okay. Or email her at info@trueyouministries.com. And we have special guest today is Phil Cox. If you'd like to reach out to him, his phone number is
I may have lost my
573.
connection a little.
Oh, you with us there, Phil? You are paused. I'm sure you'll come back here shortly.
Mhm.
And just to pick up where I was, his phone number is 573-308-8257. Your phone number is, Phil's phone number is 573-308-8257. Email Phil at philcoxchap@gmail.com. And also his website is griefrecoverymethod.com. Now,
Yeah.
getting into this episode, we wanted to touch on now the real important question. And what I want to know is, what is the grief recovery method?
The grief recovery method is an action program, a step-by-step structured action program that has been used for over 40 years, and actually began with John James when he lost an infant son. And so
Mhm.
he went searching for something to help him and could not find anything that was helpful. And so he just began to develop his own method to do that, which eventually led to the Grief Recovery Handbook. And then,
Mhm.
so people came to him, began to come to him, and then eventually he began to realize that he needed to train others to do this. And so that led to the Grief Recovery Institute. And then Russell Friedman joined him as a volunteer and then stayed. And so the Grief Recovery Handbook is in its about third printing now, 20th anniversary edition. And so now there are thousands of specialists. And a lot of us are able to do online work as well. But it's a step-by-step action program. The group program is 8 weeks. The individual is 7 weeks, and
Mhm.
helping children with loss is a 4-week program. And grief recovery for pet loss is 6
Mm.
weeks. And so
Wow.
those programs are all based on the grief recovery method. And so those are, once you start, let's see, after the second session on grief recovery group, it's a closed group. And so we we establish a very close knit relationship. We break up into smaller groups to do some very difficult personal work. I remember when I, as a chaplain, was looking for something to help other people. So I'm never an impulse buyer, and I don't grab the first thing that comes up. And so I was looking everywhere I could think of, and I ran across this method. And so I thought and I looked and I checked, and I finally went to the training to learn how to help others. What I didn't count on was doing the personal work during the training that I did. And I realized from experience of how effective it is. And then a couple of researchers from Kent State University did the research, peer reviewed, published in the American Journal of Health Education, and recognized the effectiveness of the grief recovery method. And as I said, they are looking to a second step in that and looking to researching helping children with loss. And so that's the development of it. And I was trained by one of the trainers who John James trained initially, one of the very earliest people that he trained. And so, and we just passed our second anniversary of the death of John, our founder. And the thing is, he left all of us with the skills to deal with that. And his son, Paul James, is now the executive director. He sort of handed that off. And so that's the history of it. But the method is we gather in a large group, and then after the first session, we break down into smaller groups. And what's amazing is, as a specialist, to watch these small groups develop this close-knit bond because they share some very personal things. And watch this process of how those burdens are lifted, how those hearts are healed, and the difference in those people when they arrive, and then after that 8th week when they come through this. And I'm reminded every single time, this is why I do this. This is why I do this. The amazement of people. And as I'm going to meet with someone this afternoon to see if they want to do an individual session. And actually, there's a couple who just read the book. They haven't gone through the whole thing. They just simply read the book, which is helpful in itself. And they want their 18-year-old daughter to do it. And so I will actually be working with her. That's the plan anyway. But the couple who just simply read the book, and I've heard this before, they said, everybody should do this. Everybody. And I've heard people say everybody should be required to do this. And I said, well, it's kind of hard to do that.
Right.
Because, we're all grievers.
We're all going to deal with loss at some point.
Yes. There's nobody who escapes it. And it starts when we're very young and continues. It's not if, it's when and what's next. So the method, that's the method. It's an action program. We don't just talk, we take steps. And there's homework, there's reading in the book, and there's homework every week. And, at some point it gets pretty difficult, it gets pretty hard. And I don't deviate from the method because there's no freelancing, because we all train the same way. The only advice I usually give is trust the method. And I usually say, this is going to be hard. If you'll stick with it, you'll be glad you did. I've never had anyone who's gone all the way through and said, I wish I hadn't done
that. For those just tuning in, this is True You Ministries with Stacy Echeverria, your pastoral counselor, and her special guest today is Phil Cox. He's an advanced certified grief recovery specialist, and he's currently talking about the grief recovery method. And I'm sorry, I kind of cut you off there, Stacy. What were you going to say?
Oh, yeah. No, I went through the grief recovery method. I went through it with a grief recovery specialist as well. And I'm living proof that it does work if you work it. There is work involved. It can be painful, but that really is part of the healing process. And I know that some of our listeners may not know the Lord. They may not be people of faith yet. This is, Phil, I think what might be important to share is that this is not a faith based program. However, people of faith can go through it. And I know that there are grief recovery method counselors that are people of faith as well, correct?
Very much so. Yes. Yes. And there's a reason that it's not faith-based. And obviously, it's not anti-faith, it's neutral.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and
Mm-hmm.
it's because some people who come to us, uh, maybe either their main crisis or one of their crises is a loss of faith.
Right.
Some people don't want to have anything to do with a faith-based program. But
Mm-hmm.
in 13 years of doing this, I've had one person who was disappointed that it wasn't faith-based. And
Mm,
I had known her from previous pastoral counseling experiences. She was well
yeah.
known to me from that. And she didn't like it that we weren't doing a faith-based program. And so she went
Mm,
through the first session and didn't come back. And
mm,
it wasn't unexpected for me, but
mm-hmm.
no one else has had a problem with that. And
Yeah.
so that's the reason. And we do grief recovery sessions in church buildings. And
Mm-hmm.
part of our session is we just explain why this is not. So
Mm-hmm.
during our sessions, we don't do prayer. We don't do any of those faith related things. However, we emphasize if your faith is part of your story,
Mm-hmm.
yes, absolutely, you bring that in because that's a part
Yeah.
of your story, a part of your life, a part of your faith, and a part of whatever is going on with you. It's just that we don't bring that in as a part of the program.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And I
Right.
know I had to kind of make sure I made that clear to one of people in my groups not too long ago. And
Mm-hmm.
because she said, and this was online, she said, "Can I pray with so and so?" And I said, "Well, let's don't do that right now." And then I came back later and said, "Let me clarify. You have your faith and you bring that in because that's your story. But we don't do that for each other in this."
Mm.
And so
Okay.
she understood. And I, again, gave her the
Okay.
reason. And so, and that's mainly the reason, because again, if you bring that up, it could be anti what somebody else's faith is. And so
Mm-hmm.
it causes confusion and creates an entirely different issue that was not there in the first place.
Right.
So that's the
Right.
reason
Right.
that
Yeah.
the approach is the way it is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
again,
Thank you.
sometimes your faith will help you get through this.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as we have a few minutes left here, well, about 5 minutes left here, and I want
Mm-hmm.
to ask, what are some practical steps an adult can take to provide in helping to a grieving child?
Um, Learn to recognize the source of their grief, and sometimes it's listening and sometimes it's just in the moment. Pick up on little things that they may say and tune in and say, "Oh, did that did that bother you, and why did that bother you? Why did passing by that house, and that doesn't make sense to us, but that made sense to them?" And give
Mm-hmm.
them a chance to explain that to you, because again, something has stirred them. That's a moment
Mm-hmm.
that you can use. And again, helping children with loss is a skill set you carry around. It's not a specific time that you work with children. It's anytime,
Mm-hmm.
anywhere, any location. And you just tune
Mm-hmm.
into them because they can't they don't know how to express those things to you, but tune into those moments, give them the emotional support. And sometimes we use the terms, what they're doing is acting out. They've just got emotional energy that they don't know how to express. And so let's get to the bottom of that if we can. And we can't
Mm-hmm.
say, "Talk to me," because sometimes they don't
Mm-hmm.
want to talk to you. But catch those moments when you can and be
Yeah.
willing to listen. Give them that time to do that. And when you allow
Mhm.
them that time, you'll discover some things, and then you can help them to give voice.
Mhm.
Always let them give
Mhm.
voice to what's bothering them.
Mhm.
That's the most helpful
Mhm.
thing to do, I think.
Yeah.
It's emotional energy. That's the first time I've heard that term, but
Yes, and that's
yeah,
a
that
very
makes so
helpful
much
term
sense.
because,
Yeah,
we have it as well.
yeah,
We have it
Mhm.
as well. Yeah, it's like a tea kettle without the vent, without the thing that lets the steam out, and that
mm,
energy's got to go somewhere, and
yeah,
it will. Once you add more heat to the flame, more losses of various kinds, that builds up. Steam's going to build up, the pressure's going to build up. Or we use the term, you've got a little backpack and you carry it around and you keep adding stones to it. You keep adding weight to that backpack,
Mhm.
and it gets heavy
Mhm.
after a while. And little things like I didn't make the team. I got bullied at school.
Yeah.
Someone
Yeah.
was mean to me. I got a
Mhm.
bad grade, or just small disappointments and large ones.
mm,
Those add up over
Mhm.
time. And then a main
Mhm.
loss. A grandparent died,
Mhm.
a pet died, all those things.
Mhm.
And unless we
Mhm.
help them along the way, one great thing, and I'll try to make this short, you move, which is necessary, go to every room in that house and talk about that room. What fun did we have
Mm.
in the room? Let's say goodbye to the room.
Mm.
To the room. Talk to the pet. Talk to the pet. What do you need to say to the pet? What would you say to the pet? Let them talk to the pet. And then sometimes they'll say what they need to it and they're on their way. To
Yeah.
us, that makes no sense. To them, they just need to say what they need to say. And
Yeah.
so, again, tune into what they need to do. Let them do it. Let them do it.
yeah, yeah. Very nice, Stacy. What can you leave our listeners with when it comes to helping children deal with loss?
So as an adult, and doing the counseling that I do, what I've been learning about trauma, and so we're experiencing what we've been talking about today is trauma. And
Yes.
so every single trauma has grief attached to it. And so recognizing that, moving is traumatizing, right? Not being friends with a friend that you were friends with for throughout grade school, who suddenly doesn't want to be friends with you anymore. That's traumatic, right? Parents getting a divorce or they're separated, that's traumatic. But recognizing that there is grief associated with all of those traumas,
Yeah.
Mm,
and that even though as adults we hadn't learned how to process grief well or in healthy ways, I would say get comfortable with feeling uncomfortable, because your kids need you, and they need to learn healthy ways of processing through their grief so that they don't cope in ways that could be life ending. I mean, that's
yeah,
an extreme, but it can, depending on how people learn how to cope with pain. And it's really all about numbing out painful feelings, and really just acknowledging that the feelings are there, they are painful. And I love what you said, Phil, giving voice, allowing them to talk to the room or the pet that they've lost and say
I
what they
lost it
need to
again.
say to help them process through it. So I really love that. And what I'm hearing too is that these are tools that can be provided to them throughout their lifetime, so that when they grow up and they have kids of their own, they're going to know how to help their own kids process through grief as well, grief and loss. So,
well,
yeah,
we
but I
learned.
do want to leave us with, yeah, go ahead.
Yes. No, we learned so much today on this topic. It's
Yeah.
a great two-part episode we did, or topic we did. And yes,
Yeah.
Stacy, what do you want to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, so Psalm 147:3 came to mind and I jotted it down. It says, God heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. And today we were talking about heart wounds, and we all have them. And, for those that maybe are not people of faith yet, to know that he knows your pain. He knows your heart is broken. He knows that you're experiencing loss, and he's just waiting for you to invite him into your life and into your heart so that he can heal up your broken heart and heal your heart wounds.
Yes. Yes. If you missed any part of today's show, or if you want to go back to part 1, this was part 2. If you missed any part of today's show, or you missed part 1 entirely, go to trueyouministries.com for the entire episode. Thank you, Phil, for joining us. You provided with so much information. We could probably do a whole week series on this, but thank you so much for the information you shared with our listeners.
Thank you, Todd and Stacy,
really
for
great.
And until next time, stay blessed.
You've been listening to True You Ministries with pastoral counselor Stacy Echeverria. Stacy is a licensed pastoral counselor whose own journey has taught her the importance of having a safe place to discuss the harder issues of life. You can learn more about Stacy and her heartfelt desire to help people, much like yourself, who may be at a place of pain and confusion by calling her at 626-461-3344. That's 626-461-3344. Or feel free to email her at info@trueyouministries.com. That email once again is info@trueyouministries.com. Thank you for tuning into today's show, and we'll see you next week at the same time. And may God richly bless you.